Good afternoon. I'll call this meeting of the House Finance and Policy Committee to order. I'll go to Representative Norris to see if he has reviewed the minutes. If he has, would like to make a motion.
As Chair Howard, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from the February 28th meeting of the Housing Committee.
So moved. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Minutes approved. I'll also note a quorum is present. Members, we have 5 bills up today. Again, we remind folks we did reserve this room, have this room for an extra hour. I don't know if we'll need it. Maybe we can make our work in good time by 4:30, but we do have that extra hour. And the first bill up we have is House File 917 with Vice Chair Agbaje. Vice Chair Agbaje, would you like to move your bill in front of the committee?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Please present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So today I'm presenting House File 917. This bill updates many provisions in Section 504B, also known as our landlord-tenant law, some of which has not been substantially updated since Minnesota became a state. So when a landlord seeks to evict a tenant, the process in Minnesota is one of the faster ones in the country. It can take anywhere in about a week's time for a whole family's life to be turned upside down. An eviction makes it harder to find new housing, more likely that a family will end up in worse housing, or possibly with no options at all. This is detrimental to a person's physical and mental health, prevents the ability to maintain a job, and harms children's performance in school. But today, we have an opportunity to make the court process clearer, less chaotic, more helpful, and more humane. Eviction comes down hardest on Minnesota's low-income families across the entire state. Myself, I've been an attorney, or I am an attorney, and I have volunteered at the Hennepin County Housing Court Project for a couple of years now, and I've seen firsthand how fearful tenants are of losing their homes. I've counseled people who fall behind on their rent and who just need that little bit more time to apply for emergency assistance. If this bill becomes law, tenants and landlords would have time to find a meaningful solution and not have to go to court as often. So there are 3 main functions of this bill to kind of reform the eviction process in Minnesota. One part of the bill clarifies and updates the eviction process, provides time for tenants to recover possession of the property, and that means usually paying rent that's in arrears. The bill also extends the time for the first court appearance after the summons, and this extended time will help tenants seek legal help or find the money to be able to keep their home. 2, under this bill, eviction proceedings become a non-public record until the court enters a judgment, and it will remain a non-public record unless a writ of recovery is issued. What that means is that until you are actually evicted by a judge, you will not have an eviction on your record. 3rd, the bill will also allow tenants to bring forward habitability defenses when faced with an eviction without having to first pay rent that might be an issue in the case. In Minnesota, when tenants are faced with a landlord who does not keep up their end of the covenant and then tries to evict them, the tenant has a right to bring up living conditions as a defense. And these are what are known in the legal community as Fritz defenses. Unfortunately, the current practice in Minnesota amounts to a violation of due process by requiring tenants to pay the disputed rent amount into court before a judge will even hear about the substandard living conditions that a tenant is facing. If the tenant does not pay, then the case is disposed in favor of the landlord, and no issues about the living conditions are heard or decided upon. Practically, this means that some of our lowest income community members who are living in substandard housing cannot defend themselves in court against the landlord's allegations. By addressing this issue in House File 917, we ensure that more of our low-income neighbors have true access to justice. It is time for Minnesota to update our landlord-tenant law with meaningful and substantial reforms so that the court system can provide justice for both landlords and tenants, and not just the parties who feel most comfortable in court. And so with that, I'll move on to my testifiers who can further explain the importance and specifics in the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and members and testifiers. With the agenda we have today, we are going to ask testifiers to keep their comments to 2 minutes or less, so we have time to get through all the public testimony and our work. And with that, we go to our first testifier, Mr. Elwood with Legal Aid. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Ron Elwood with Legal Aid. I want to thank Representative Agbaje, Vice Chair Agbaje, for bringing this bill that we had been talking about for a long time, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for co-authoring. I will be extremely brief. Legal Aid lives in court. That's what we do, and that's why, you know, we see this, live this every day. And my colleague who's here, the supervising or the litigation director at Legal Aid, who's formerly the managing attorney of our housing unit, knows this stuff inside and out and understands the importance of this. The last thing I just want to say is I want to really express my thanks to the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association, with whom we have been working, are working, and will continue to work with to understand any concerns and try to work this out as best we can. And we really appreciate their constant engagement with us in trying to strike the right balance. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next up, we have Luke Grunman with Legal Aid. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. Thank you especially to Representative Agbaje for moving this bill forward. I'll try to be brief. My job is to tell you a little bit about this bill and why it's important, and then if needed, help answer questions. I'll say one big theme, Representative Agbaje already recognized this, but this bill seeks to change the eviction process from a place where people are shuffled through a system, are evicted, are left with housing eviction records, and left in a position where it's extremely difficult to find housing. This bill seeks to transform the eviction process as it exists in other parts of the country to a place where people can find their homes, find deals with the landlords. They use that opportunity to have win-win situations created. So the bill creates time for that. It also creates the process for that to make sure that people have the information they need before they go to court, so that they can access legal resources, they can access financial resources in order to pay off any rent that's owed to the landlord. As the representative said, Minnesota became a state in 1858, and in that time, since then, we've come a long way. We've passed the Fair Housing Act, we've passed the Violence Against Women Act at the federal level, we've passed anti-retaliation statutes at the state level. All of those laws exist in the eviction process to protect tenants from being evicted when they shouldn't be. Those laws and many more. When our lawyers review a case to look for legal defenses, they do a checklist of 59 different things. Under the existing eviction process, though, they have virtually minutes to do that. Trials can't be extended for more than 6 days. For the lawyers in the room, people who have litigated cases, it's just not enough time to learn about your rights and to have a judicial officer, a judge, make a decision about whether that family should be evicted or not. These are important rights, but there's an old saying in the law that a right without a remedy isn't really a right at all. And that's what we're dealing with in eviction court. So with that, I'm more than happy to answer questions about the specifics in this bill. I'll say it's long, it's fairly technical because we're changing things that haven't been changed for so long with this bill. But I'm happy to answer any questions that people have or help the representative with that.
Thank you. Next, we have Kyle Burnt with Minnesota Multi-Housing. Welcome to the committee.
Hi, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Kyle Burnt. I am the Director of Public Policy with the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association, known as MHA. I appreciate the opportunity to raise MHA concerns on House File 917. Prior to those comments, I want to note our appreciation for the continued work with Legal Aid and with the author and other stakeholders on the proposal. We feel we've had some really good conversations and understanding where each other are at. On to our concerns. Most housing providers are not rushing to file an eviction. They are expensive to file and are treated as a last resort. Good providers look to work with residents to resolve issues prior to filing an eviction. A 2016 study of evictions in Minneapolis found that 93% of evictions were for non-payment and that tenants were on average 2 months behind on rent. The proposal today will create a much longer eviction process and will introduce additional costs to housing providers through legal representation and lost rent. These costs are important when considered in context for how housing providers operate. As drafted, these delays will result in at least 2 months of non-payment before resolution. This proposal could result in unintended consequences in the market. We could find housing providers less willing to take a chance on a tenant who has a red flag on their rental application, or there could be rental increases to offset these costs. While we generally evaluate proposals on their own merits, as an association, we are concerned with the totality of the landlord-tenant proposals that the committee's heard and how they would interact as a single landlord-tenant law, specifically when you compare this bill with others such as the 14-day notice. Again, we appreciate the communication and the work together with legal aid. We will continue to work with the author and other stakeholders on the proposal and as we continue to evaluate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to testify in the bill? And I did want to just make a mention to members and to those in the audience, if you could mute your cell phones, that would be appreciated. And if there's no other testifiers, we'll go to members. We'll go first to Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and if Mr. Burnt could come back.
He didn't quite make it to his seat, but.
Almost there.
Yeah.
He's got to get his steps in. But I will start off and start asking the question of both he and the author. So if I remember numbers, in 2022, there were 18,855 evictions. And Mr. Burnt, you said that of those, the percentage that you had quoted was, and then that most of those were for 2 months back rent already. I'm just trying to figure out, you've already gone through a lot with Minnesota Rent Help during the pandemic not getting paid, and your organization and I worked on that a lot together. But if you could sort of set the landscape as to what this does in the circumstances that you just shared.
Mr. Burnt.
So the circumstances I was sharing were specific to 2016. It was a study in 2016 of Minneapolis itself, and that said 93% of evictions for non-payment. Generally, depending on which study you look at, somewhere around 90% of evictions are for non-payment. Ballparking it, of course, on that. It would just end up with a lot more non-payment issues and continued time of duration, how many non-payment occurrences on the rent, of course. I think that's kind of.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And because I respect my friend Representative Agbaje, I'll ask what, your numbers that you're using for numbers of evictions that happened, let's say in the last year. Is it the 18,855 that I have? Just because I'm trying to figure out the number that we're dealing with and what that does to the folks who actually have to carry the note on the lost revenue if we delay these evictions, if you could.
Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Nash. So for me, when I look at it, yeah, it is, I think it's that recent, one of the reports that we had in committee with about 18,000 evictions. And I look at it at the cost to those families, at the cost to those children that are potentially having to be put out on the street. They're put in a traumatic situation where they don't know where they're going to be that night. Yes, there is a cost to the landlords as well, but I would hope that we could ask ourselves, kind of looking at the totality of the situation, what are the costs to those families who then now have to use various emergency services, as well as the cost to the landlords. And I think if we put in place a law like this that gives the time for both parties to come together, both parties to talk with each other, both parties to figure out, here's where we can get some assistance for you, here's where we can maybe get some legal help for you if the situation desires. Or, and again, not to bring in other bills, but we've heard bills here that would help with mediation, and maybe that's something that could happen to prevent a displacement.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And there's only a handful of us that are here that have been around since Representative Davids instituted this fee, but we're trying to seek out peace in the valley, right? And I think I have to pay $1, Representative Johnson, to somebody. But if we're trying to seek peace in the valley, you have a representative here from one of the principal organizations that would be adversely affected, and they're testifying against the bill or have concerns. I don't want to kick people out on the street, father of 6, I understand that that's hugely impactful, but as impactful is putting a business in a position where they could be potentially adversely impacted to the point of they have to lay people off, they have to make financial decisions themselves, they're trying to operate a business, they're trying to employ people, they're trying to pay those people. This doesn't strike me as something that, just in hearing testimony that's in opposition to the bill, that we're quite ready to do. Our goal should be to try to figure out how do we thread the needle to get to that point where we can actually have the interested parties come together and say, this is something that we can work with, because clearly this is not something that we can work with. And I would encourage you, if you haven't already, talk to some of the housing providers that were jammed up during the pandemic that went months, and I'm not even sure they've all fully been paid yet. To institute something again like this that's going to delay that for them, it just seems very heavy-handed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Agbaje, comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll just say, as Mr. Burnt, yes, we have been talking, the advocates have been talking, and, we're still coming together on figuring out exactly what the final solution, the final outcome will be. But, again, I do go back to this question of where do we want people to go? And how do we want to make sure that the legal system is not just churning people out who may not have the same type of resources and access to resources that many of us do.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And these are some comments, and you may have some answers for this, but, in your opening comments, you talked about how we need to change the eviction law because people are sometimes finding their whole lives disrupted within 7 days of this event. And yet, I would disagree in that, in this regard, and that is that would be true if the tenant thought he had the money or whatever or to pay it, and all of a sudden the day that they were supposed to pay it, or 5 days afterwards, whatever the grace period is, all of a sudden that money disappeared. The reality is that everyone, I've been in situations like that too, know as it comes close to that time, whether or not you got enough money for the rent or whatever is happening. And you said, well, we need to give more time so they can explore these options of money that they can address. And I would say that opportunity occurs prior to the need for the eviction as well. And I've always been one of those that suggests, what can we do to help the system actually prevent rather than deal with it afterwards, because it's a lot cheaper to do that. And so when we make the assumption that the struggle or the trauma that this individual or family is going through only starts when the rent is due, is not really true, because it actually occurred prior to that when they knew what wasn't going to happen. And so what are the processes and what are the things that we should be doing to help people understand that it's okay to start looking for help prior to that eviction rather than afterwards? I think we heard in testimony that most are in arrears 2 months before the eviction actually occurs. That's given an ample time for that to occur for all of the development that we want to do. And if it could start earlier, so much the better. But in reality, the tenant actually is much more aware of the situation that's confronting them into the future than the landlord is. And I just think that's something that we need to at least consider when we talk about what we can do to help people not get into that situation, because that's always where I'm coming from. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Comment? Okay, we'll go to Representative Myers.
Thank you, Chair Nelson. Thank you, Representative. Just a question I had. There's been a lot of data thrown out there, and I wanted to ask you a question if you believe that with the changes that you're proposing, do you think that some of these property owners are now going to look at filing eviction actions sooner, and which may result in more eviction actions? If there's a delayed time, they may say, okay, I'm not going to wait the 2 months or 30 days or whatever it is. don't know if you've thought about that, or I'm just interested to know your feedback.
Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Representative. It's hard to say how people will necessarily react. I think what happens in other states is people are still filing evictions at the time period that they think it's appropriate. I imagine that that will still continue to happen in Minnesota. I guess I would say that most people, both tenants and landlords, have really good relationships. And most of them are figuring these situations out sooner rather than later. This bill kind of discusses when we get to the point of the landlord has decided to go to court. And so I would hope that in the context of that, we're still putting in safeguards to ensure that, people aren't going in angry or, very just, frustrated, and that we kind of put in some breaks to kind of help slow the situation down. So then that way, some of additional measures that maybe they didn't work at the beginning before the process started could now be used again and implemented.
Representative Myers.
Yep, thank you for that. I just, want to make sure, I always kind of look, I don't own property, I've rented personally, but I look at the operational consequences of some of these bills, and I just wonder if some of the standards of practices will change for property owners. So I just would make sure to, consider some of that. Thank you.
Representative Johnson.
Chair Howard, Representative Agbaje, I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to help those who are in, some of them who are in tough situations, not be evicted. Trying to work things out. Unfortunately, I think this is the wrong way to do that. I do have some concerns on this bill. No, I've actually rented a number of places in my lifetime. Thankfully, it's been a while, but I have. And I'm looking back of the 8 different places I've rented at. I've only had one that's actually had a written lease. And in your bill, the contents of the complaint, copies of the written lease have to be provided. I don't know how I could ever get evicted if I don't have a copy of the lease that was never signed and there was no lease. So you're going to end up increasing some costs because now you're requiring more paperwork and more work for housing providers should an unforeseen thing come up. Also, there's situations that come up that I don't know how this bill, how it would work. I've actually, as a law enforcement officer, had to do evictions on people who had established residency at a vacant home. The owners of the home were getting ready to sell it, and they found out people were living there. And the people that decided to move in somebody else's property, not paying rent, they got the utilities hooked up, and they were paying them, but they lost the sale opportunity because the people refused to move out. By the time we got through the entire eviction process was 9 months from the time I served the first paper to the time I could finally go there and physically remove them because they had established residency. This bill is going to actually make it longer for that to happen because it extends time periods for things to happen, for court dates. The way this bill reads, the judge couldn't act immediately on some of this stuff because your bill does not allow them to do that. So like I say, there's some problems with this bill. I think you need to really work with the multi-housing individuals, work on it. I can also say this about 15, 16 years ago, there were some changes in the eviction process. To try to reduce the number of evictions. The number of evictions went up. For the simple reason, by changing the time periods and how things work, the housing providers started, instead of waiting 2 or 3 months and working within that time period, as soon as they were 10 days late, that eviction notice was going out. And a lot of times that's what's happening now because of the changes we made 15, 16 years ago. So when you do these changes on these things, you got to look very closely at it. You have to look at the unintended consequences. And you have to work with all parties to try to work it out. Right now, we are in dire need of rental units. We are way short in our stock. And stuff like this is going to make it worse. I hate to say that. I know you're trying to do the right thing, but you have to look at the unintended consequences. I do have one question for you. You made some statistics right at the beginning. Are those from Minnesota or are those national? Those statistics you gave out.
Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Johnson. I'm not entirely sure which stats, but everything I talked about was specific to Minnesota.
Thank you.
Final comments on the bill, Representative Agbaje?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. You know, again, I just go back to the fact that when we are in court, we're kind of looking at the worst case scenario. And what we want to do is ensure that the worst case scenario is not, in fact, a terrible situation for both the landlord and the tenant. The changes that we are proposing here today are changes that have been talked about, particularly by those who work with tenants. But we've also had conversations with landlords, and I've spoken to many landlords in my district as well, too, and they understand that there are changes that need to be made. And so what we're just trying to do here is ensure that those who, housing is precarious for them. Housing is something that is not stable. It's not something that they can count on. And that making sure that we can do as much as we can to ensure that they have an opportunity to continue to stay in their homes, take care of their families, keep their jobs, and contribute in really positive ways to our society.
With that, I'll renew the motion that House File 917 be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill. And with that, the bill is laid over. Next bill up is House File 1976, Representative Norris. Representative Norris, I'll move your bill, House File 1976, be referred to the House Commerce, Finance, and Policy Committee. And with that, Representative Norris, please present your bill.
Thank you, Chair Howard and members. Manufactured housing provides homes for 180,000 people throughout the state who are, according to Housing and Urban Development Guidelines, 80% low to very low income. Despite these limited incomes, 87% of the residents of manufactured home parks are also home owners. Historically, manufactured housing has been the state's most affordable source of both rental housing and home ownership. The cost to rent a lot in a manufactured home park is typically half the cost of renting a one-bedroom apartment. The cost to buy a manufactured home is usually less than a third of the cost to buy a site-built home. The resident homeowners are, however, extremely vulnerable because while they own their homes, they only rent the land that's underneath it. They are a captive market since their homes often cannot be moved due to condition, moving costs, few available alternative lots, and parks barring the move in of older homes. Since the 1980s, Minnesota has sought to protect the property rights of the homeowners. The state has required that rents be uniform throughout the park, with some certain exceptions, that rents not be based on the number of people residing or staying in the home, and importantly, that rent increases be, quote, reasonable, although this term has never been defined. This proposal attempts to balance the rights of landowners and homeowners with a few targeted changes, limiting rent increases to once a year, providing all prospective residents with a 5-year rent history, allowing residents to continue to make payments with checks and money orders, and defining a reasonable rental increase as one based on inflation, increasing costs, or matching their direct competition. And with that, Chair Howard, I'm looking forward to some great testimony from some of our testifiers.
Members, we do have a number of folks signed up to testify, so it would remind folks to keep your remarks to 2 minutes. And with that, we'll go to our first testifier, Dave Anderson, Executive Director with APAC.
Thank you. Chair Howard, members of the committee, just to walk briefly through the changes that Representative Norris mentioned. So first of all, limiting increases to once a year. Under state law, increases are currently allowed twice during a 12-month period. Obviously, this creates great uncertainty for people with fixed or limited incomes. Second, providing prospective residents with a 5-year rent history, and why that's important is when residents commit to pay lot rent and move into a community, they're also committing to own a home on that rented land. And moving a home can be a costly process. And states like Oregon already require disclosure of rent history in order to allow prospective residents to get that full picture of what their potential costs could be. Third, allowing residents to continue to make rent payments in the forms that they have for decades, including checks and money orders. And this is significant because residents, as Representative Norris mentioned, are often low to very low income, making them the people least likely to have bank accounts. And so they can find themselves having to pay additional charges or even third-party services in order to pay their rent. So the idea of having to pay someone to help you to pay your rent seems cruel. And there are states like Washington that have provisions like this. Fourth, providing some clarity based on some common sense measures of what makes for reasonable rents. So essentially, you could, a community owner could demonstrate that a rent increase is reasonable because it corresponds to CPI, or that it directly relates to operating, maintaining, or improving the community, or that there are comparable communities in that market charging comparable amounts. So it seems like it's a pretty expansive series of ways in which to demonstrate that a rent increase is reasonable and to fill in that, that missing part of the requirement that's been on the books since the 1980s for rent increases to be reasonable. There are also provisions in the bill related to rent increases greater than CPI if there are outstanding unaddressed health and safety violations, or if there's an attempt to recoup fines, penalties, or costs of litigation. And also a provision having to do with a way of avoiding residents essentially being in a position of paying twice for utility services if those services were previously included in lot rent and are now without a corresponding freeze or decrease in rent being added as a new charge on top of those costs. So those are the primary elements. Thank you very much, Chair and committee members.
Thank you. Next, we have Trevor Nelson.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair Howard and members of the committee. My name is Trevor Nelson, and I am a resident of the Cimarron Manufactured Home Community in Lake Elmo. I have been living in manufactured homes for over 2 decades, and in one here in Lake Elmo since 2017. I absolutely believe manufactured housing is the most cost-effective form of home ownership in America, and so do the people who live in my community. There are people in my community who have lived there for decades. Some of them moved in when lot rent was less than $100 a month. As you've heard, we don't own the land, so we pay lot rent. That wasn't usually an issue, as it used to be mom and pop landowners who owned the communities, and they generally only raised rent as needed, and this kept lots affordable. But many communities are now being bought out by corporations, many of them huge out-of-state publicly traded operations who are demanding substantially higher rent every year, often with little to none of that money being put back into the community. When I asked the former Cimarron office manager about our large rent increases, her exact answer was, "We have shareholders to pay." Cimarron is owned by ELS, a corporation out of Chicago. Since I moved to Cimarron just under 6 years ago, rent has increased almost $200 a month. This January, they increased our rent by $66 a month, making our rent $906. With over 550 homes in the community, Cimarron is currently taking in $500,000 a month just in rental income. Yet we have roads full of potholes and a crumbling infrastructure that they appear to have no interest in repairing. So what we're paying is leaving the state to pay shareholders on the backs of homeowners, knowing the majority of residents cannot afford to move. These rent increases have seriously impacted the quality of living for people in my community and communities around the state. I know many of the proud homeowners in my community who are already struggling with rent increases have been forced to start going to food banks and accepting rent assistance, especially since the pandemic wiped out the savings of many people. We pleaded with Cimarron to not raise the rent during the pandemic, as so many of us were unemployed. Yet they still increased our rent by $30 a month. And I can honestly say that if Minnesota would have had something like House File 1976 already in place, I would not be living in the Cimarron community today. Because if I had been able to see how much Cimarron had increased their rents in the 5 years before we moved in, we would have chosen another community to live in.
Mr. Nelson, if you could conclude your comments. Thanks.
All right. So please support House File 1976 because it gives homeowners like myself and the more than 180,000 others living in manufactured homes across across Minnesota a fighting chance to stay in the homes we own and the communities we love. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Don Muller.
Good afternoon, Chair Howard
Welcome.
and members of the committee. My name is Dawn Muller. I am a 13-and-a-half-year resident of the Brookside Mobile Home Community in Shoreview. I love my home, my neighbors, and the green space. I take great pride in owning my home and in having raised and launched my children from there. I moved there when I found myself a single mom, and it was the only affordable housing in Shoreview and the school district. I think that may still be the case. Brookside is the diversity here at Brookside is worth noting. Our kids share the schools in the community with the privileged residents of North Oaks. So the affordability and diversity of Brookside is important to our state. Many of my neighbors are new Americans, people of color, people with disabilities, single-parent families, and multi-generational families. If this bill is not passed, I'm not at all sure if this diversity in my community of 210 homes will continue to be possible. I've never testified before in support of a bill, but I have come to realize through organizing my community around issues facing all of us as residents, how important it is to speak up for myself and my disenfranchised neighbors. What makes me use the strong term disenfranchised? We own our homes but rent the land, as you've already heard. If this rent becomes unaffordable through significant increases, we face not only eviction from our community, but also the loss of our homes. So we have no real power. Our most recent rent increase, effective early this year, we received a letter with wording that suggested, we are raising your rent by $40 a month because we can. For days after receiving that letter, I thought about how this $40 increase in monthly expense comes at a time when families are struggling to feed themselves and keep the lights and heat on. I am privileged enough to have a second job and can pick up an additional shift to cover that increased cost. Not everyone can do that. Did you know that the Social Security payment cost of living for 2023 is 8.7%? Our rent increased by approximately 7% at the same time. Don't get me wrong. I know that business is business. I know that Summit owns manufactured home communities because it's a very profitable investment and business model. Rent increases are certainly necessary to maintain profitability. This bill is great because it does not apply rent controls, but only requires that rent increases be justified, etc. I don't know about you, but I don't get a pay raise at my job more than once per year, if at all. And that pay raise for me is about 4%, certainly not ever 7%, ever. With the rent increases over the last 5 years, we have also seen a decrease in the services. We have less on-site property management, our streets are no longer clean, our water quality is poorer, inequitable communication takes place, less green space, less freedom to meet with our neighbors, and an increase in unsafe conditions and just less respect. We just want to have a decent home and a safe community to come home to at the end of our workday.
Ms. Muller, if you could conclude your comments, thanks.
Sure. At our park, people who pay by check are charged $50 for just writing a check. And so I just want to thank you for this time, and thank you for listening, and I appreciate your consideration of manufactured home communities.
Thank you. Next up, Mark Bruner. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark Bruner, Manufactured Modular Home Association of Minnesota. I do have a handout for the committee, if the page could.
Yes, our page can help get that out to the committee.
So, Mr. Chair, members, thank you for the opportunity to comment on the bill. I'm speaking on behalf of the owners of manufactured home communities in Minnesota. I realize my time is limited, so I'll try to do the best I can to highlight our primary concerns. Essentially, the bill would impose statewide rent control on Minnesota's largest source of non-subsidized affordable workforce housing, that being approximately 1,000 privately owned manufactured home communities, severely limiting their ability to cover costs and expenses for making upgrades and improvements to infrastructure, storm shelters, clubhouses, and other capital investments necessary to continue operating their communities. The bill would also adversely impact those who right now are considering doing expansions or perhaps even developing a new community. I mean, essentially, the bill is a solution in search of a problem. Our association is not aware of skyrocketing rent increases in communities throughout Minnesota. Most of our community owners did not do an increase during the COVID years, so they're playing catch up. They still had to bear the 8, 9, 10% inflation rate during that time to make improvements and to continue operating their businesses. The chilling effect that rent control has on the development and expansion of affordable housing is not a hypothetical opposition argument. I mean, the reality is best demonstrated and by what happened with Minneapolis and St. Paul most recently, where developers who had affordable housing projects in process, fled to the suburbs, essentially said we can't go forward. The big difference is with this bill, it's not just applying the rent control to a city, it's a statewide, it would be statewide. And capital is fungible. Those that have an interest in developing communities will simply go elsewhere where they can actually, recover their costs and operate under a situation where it's a normal business market. One of the things that we did notice in the bill is that it doesn't include cooperatively owned manufactured home communities as being limited in terms of their increases. It simply applies to privately owned communities, and with that number growing, that disparities really jumped out at us. When we heard that the bill was up for a hearing today, earlier this week, we sent out a survey to our community members just asking their response and feedback. If rent control were imposed in Minnesota, what would happen? Here's just a sampling of some of the responses I got.
Mr. Bruner, if you could conclude, would appreciate it. But
Well, sure.
please, you can finish your thought here, though. Yeah.
So the point being, we have communities, and I mentioned this in your handout, they have in process right now 188 home site expansion. They have approval for it, they have financing for it. The response was, Mark, this puts the brakes on that. I've got to go back to my investors and tell them that this is a completely different model now in terms of how we recoup our costs if we can't proceed. Another in the South Metro responded. They have 110 home site expansion approved. They're ready to break ground this spring, and they will either pause that development or scuttle it completely based on the legislation currently before us. The unintended consequences for this, Mr. Chairman, are huge. And in light of what we've seen in Minneapolis and St. Paul, we just don't think this is ready for prime time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Michelle Carlson.
Thank you, Chair Howard
Welcome to the committee.
and committee members. I have also brought here a copy of my testimony, since I only have a few minutes to talk. Thank you, though, for allowing me to be here today. My name, once again, Michelle Carlson. I am a second-generation community owner and real estate broker. I live in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Today, I came down 4.5 hours during the snowstorm, but I'm happy to be here in which to be able to talk about this House bill. As you know, I'm an active voice with affordable housing, and my 25 years in property management, specializing in manufactured housing community ownership. And I own and oversee 1,200 home sites, 6 communities in the Metro and Greater Minnesota. And I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about Zenith Terrace, one of our largest communities in Duluth, 500 home sites. And we have been there as owners since 1981, 42 years this year. Very happy to announce that we've added on to our community with 200 additional home sites, upgraded infrastructure, and really beautified the community. Our rents have always been reasonable, and we use sound business practices as we budget for maintenance and keeping the community beautiful. My concerns with this bill, certainly, and with rent control, have to do with the inability in which to be able to continue to operate these communities at the level that I am requiring, as well as my residents deserve to have. And many of my residents being with me for over 10, sometimes 15 years, also are very happy with our community. We have in Zenith Terrace zero vacancy levels. So it's hard for me to understand when a bill is based on false premise that manufactured housing community rents are skyrocketing, causing undue hardships and high vacancy levels. It's just not true. For many of us, we didn't even increase rents during the pandemic and or tried to keep it very minimal. This is to help our residents, working with them with Rent Help Minnesota, with Home Help Minnesota, and to try to keep things at a lower level and with some kind of help to our residents. We're in the process of building a community up in Greater Minnesota ourselves, a 60 home site community. And we're really reassessing if this bill were to become law. Seriously, I'm not sure I and my family would be actually continuing on with the plans for this. Developing in this kind of an environment just does not allow businesses to succeed. This bill provides increases must be limited to a three-year formula of the CPI, and under this scheme, a reasonable rent increase today would be less than 3%, and 3% is not sufficient to cover our expenses in today's economy. As you know, we have inflation currently at 8%. We have increased property taxes. St. Louis County increased our property taxes at Zenith Terrace 150% during COVID. We have increased snow removal. We have increased with our community facilities, with our community equipment. We certainly have increases in insurance, salary increases for my staff, and just vendor expenses in which to install manufactured homes. In this business climate, imposing a 3% rent cap would not even come close to covering the additional expenses and costs today. We've been in business for over 40 years and always have been a business owner that have given back to our community. We reinvest in our community and to our residents, into the neighborhoods where our communities are located. And we sponsor local events. We donate to charities. We want to be able to continue to do that. Minnesota needs affordable, non-subsidized workforce housing, and land lease community owners are certainly the largest advocates for affordable housing. Finally, this rent control bill is unnecessary, it's arbitrary and capricious, and it's targeting our manufactured housing industry. It is unfounded that during this time of need for affordable housing, our legislature wishes to harm the largest advocates. Coupling this with a horrible bill that the other house that I spoke to a couple of weeks ago, which is taking community owner property rights away, I am quite perplexed on how serious policymakers are addressing Minnesota's shortage of workforce affordable housing today. House File 1976 is not a way for Minnesota. It's not now, nor should it be in the future. Thank you very much for letting me speak in front of you.
Thanks. Next, we have Dave Check. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair Howard. My name is Dave Zeck. I'm going to try to make this short at your request, my dismay, but your request. I'd hope we'd be better at that in Minnesota, that everybody gets to speak on issues that are important. I've been in this business for 50 years. So like I said, I'm going to try to paraphrase the stuff I had because my best job got me down to 3.5 minutes. We have about 30 line item expenses when we run our property. None of those vendors have ever, in the last 10 years, given me a CPI limit on increases, much less a 3-year average. Our biggest cost drivers actually are not necessarily you folks, but government in general. Garbage bill just went up 7%. Hauler says county tipping fees went up, your rate goes up 11%. Our sewer bill just went up 11%. I want to point out, I'm sure you all know this, but I don't know if you think about it. We don't have a special rate for anything. My resident in his manufactured home in my community pays the same amount for his sewer as the guy living in the $700,000 house. We can discuss whether that's right or whether that's wrong or that's a bad policy, but that's how it is. Yet we still manage to maintain our affordability. And I don't think we get much help from any level of government. An example, we just had the road a couple years ago, the road in front of our property redone by the city. The assessment followed. To my surprise, our cost of that was 50% of the cost because we're not treated as residential. If we were residential, our costs would have been 25%. Those costs are ultimately borne by the residents, our consumers, your constituents. Again, not much help. House File 1976 references market rent. I don't even know what that is. Can somebody tell me what it is? The definition doesn't allow me to look and figure out what that is. This doesn't seem to apply to resident-owned communities. I don't know why that is. I wanted to raise a point. It talks about health and safety issues as the opportunity to avoid a rent increase. I don't know what those are. We get licensed by either a state or a local health official. We have an inspection once a year. We get a list of violations. We probably get 30 violations. understand those aren't my violations. Those are my residents' violations. There are things that they're doing that the state has cited. Because I have a license, they ask me to enforce them. Are you suggesting that a resident should violate the law and then not be able to have a rent increase? One of those instances actually was somebody who had 2 golf bags sitting on their deck. That's what the health inspector wrote up. I'm not making this stuff up. There's a portion of the bill that deals with water meters installed in communities. This committee passed House File 156 a couple weeks ago. I believe it's on the floor. Now it appears that you want to change what we agreed to. That bill was negotiated between residents, their representatives, and the industry. If you want to change that, then let's pull that bill off the floor and get it back in committee, and let's rework it so both parties have a chance to change their positions if one side's going to. My last thing I want to point out is, this concept that we're all bad guys. I seen there was some Fox News and Washington Post editorials, information in your package. This is real world. This is my world. Own a property in Blaine. I live in Blaine. Pandemic started. People got locked in their houses. A lot of uncertainty in the world. We did a rent rollback. That rent rollback in that year saved my residents, people you're talking about, $50,000. With this bill, I wouldn't have done that. I don't have the ability to recover that. I still haven't recovered all of that, which is okay. That's a choice I made. But I'm just saying there's lots of things that don't work out when you look at a picture, when you don't bring, we heard conversation earlier, bring both parties together, lets people work it out. I hope we're able to do that. I think that's what makes, Minnesota a great place to live, is the opportunity for debate, open debate, and to work through those things.
Thank you.
That's it.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Last, we have Cecil Smith of the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Cecil Smith with the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association. I'll be very brief. Our organization is opposed to rent control. I'm speaking directly to the rent control issue in this bill. This bill presents a form of rent control. Even having some relief valves is nonetheless still rent control. While it may be well-intentioned, rent control is documented to harm the most vulnerable in their search for affordable housing. In fact, rent control leads to market distortions, including disinvestment in existing housing and reduces investment in future housing. And I would urge a no vote on House File 1976. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, we do have 5 amendments, A1 through A5. We'll take those in order, and I believe Representative Nash is offering the A1. Representative Nash, is that?
I have the A1.
All right, I'm just going to go one through. I'll just say it, and folks can raise their hand. So A1, Representative Johnson.
The A1 dealt with what we just heard about. The delete section 5 of this bill, which is the water issue. We just heard from the testifier that House File 156 is sitting on the General Register. It was a negotiated bill between the parties. And now in this particular bill, it scraps the negotiated bill and puts it in a different spot. So I would like to offer the A1 amendment, which deletes the Section 5, puts House File 156 back in play. That's on the General Register. And the Chair, I would request a roll call on that one.
Roll call. Let's go to Representative Norris here. I'm not sure you need one.
Thank you, Chair Howard, and thank you, Representative Johnson. Appreciate the testimony that we've heard today, and I think it's reflective of the fact that there's an ongoing discussion going on around this bill. I've had residents in my office. I've had park owners in my office. I had park owners in my office yesterday, or virtually via Zoom, and I'm going to have park owners in my office again tomorrow. We're working in good faith on this bill, and to indicate that, I am going to accept this as a friendly amendment and would encourage members to vote yes.
Remove the roll call.
Roll call having been removed, I'll call for the vote in the A1. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The A1 is adopted. Next, we have the A2. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And should I ask for a roll call, or are we? I'll ask for one, and then you can walk it back. So on page 4, line 4.28, we're deleting that this does not apply to co-ops or resident-owned. It's a matter of fairness. If we're going to try to be punitive towards apparently the, I'm going to use air quotes, evil landowners who own these places, and I don't believe that for a minute, you should not also exempt cooperatives from something that you claim is a fair approach. So once again, offer the A2 and request a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Representative Norris.
Chair Howard, Representative Nash, I am going to recommend a no vote on this one, and I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Anderson to provide additional explanation on the reason for that.
Mr. Anderson.
Well, and thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Nash. The reason for this provision is, in this particular instance, the individuals who would pay the rent increase are the people who are deciding whether or not to adopt it. So it seems like it's a self-policing process.
Representative Nash.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I can't imagine that you have unanimity in a situation like that, and if you're trying to protect one in a privately owned organization, which is apparently what you're trying to do, maybe a dissenting vote from a cooperative might not feel like having their rent raised, and if we're actually trying to be fair, and I don't believe you are, this is very heavy-handed. Rent control is a big deal, and what will happen as a result of this bill is that people who potentially own these parks may sell out to a developer, and they'll just sell it off and we'll build regular homes, full-size homes, and then you've got nothing. So I think if you're truly trying to be fair, you would accept this amendment.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, and unfortunately, that type of logic doesn't work with me, and here's the reason why. If the owners of that cooperative are going to go outside of this agreement, it's because they've decided it was the best interest. And if they decided it's the best interest to do that, and a corporation right next door to it has the same circumstances, they're not allowed to do it, then what we were saying is that if you agree to something that is in the best interest, it's okay here, but if it's the same situation over here, it's not. And so just because you have people that say, well, we have control over that, doesn't mean then that should make any difference in regards to the same exact circumstances that may occur elsewhere. I mean, doesn't that make sense? That if you have a board of directors meeting with all of the people that are there, and it says, hey, we know that we just raised rent 6 months ago, but because of these things, we need to raise it again, and everybody says that's okay. What you're saying is, in that particular instance, it's okay. If a corporation says, we know we raised rent 6 months ago, but these same circumstances have said, hey, it's going to be, we need to raise it now, you're saying that's not okay. And so that really is an inconsistency in regards to how it is applied. If the individuals that are there and are part of this cooperative said, are going to abide by this anyway, then there's nothing wrong with having them also then apply to it. So that's the reason why I say I don't think that logic really flies, but that's my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Johnson.
Chair Howard, members, whether it's a cooperative, an LLC, privately owned, they have to follow the same rules in any other business. Our electric companies, some of us have privately owned, some of us have cooperatives. They have to follow the same rules. they can't just raise rates. In fact, in a cooperative in the electric association, the members can vote to raise their rates, but we still have to go to the state to get approval to do it. They just can't do it, even though they know they have to. Why should a cooperative in this situation not be under the same rules as a private company? There's only one word for that, and I'm not going to use it right now. I'll probably be using it later. But rent control like this doesn't work, makes things worse. You also have to remember many number of the corporations that own some of these are our pension funds. So if what's good for the goose is good for the gander, it should all be the same. So please support this amendment.
Representative Norris.
Chair Howard, we are witnessing democracy in action here, the legislative process playing out, an exchange of ideas. The advocates and I have just consulted, and we are going to recommend a yes vote on this amendment. I think some good points have been made, and I will accept it as a friendly amendment. Again, I think as a show of good faith in terms of our willingness to work with everybody, all the stakeholders, to get to a good final product on this.
Representative Nash.
Mr. Chair, I'll withdraw the roll call request.
And I'll call for the vote on the A2. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The amendment is adopted. Next, we have the A3, I believe Representative Dotseth. Do I have that right?
I do, thank you.
All right.
Chair Howard, you've got the right guy. Since we're on a roll, I'm going to have to roll call on this one, too.
All right, roll call has been requested. Two for two. We'll see.
Representative Norris, I'm submitting a friendly amendment. As we've heard, I've heard some of the testifiers today make mention that there's no monies being put back into the communities. My amendment is very simple. It just asks that we actually include park amenities to be on the list of operating expenses. I think we see that there's a lot of common areas that, as you're aware, in a lot of these type of settings that may be neglected, and this really allows that opportunity for the stakeholders to actually invest back into the property and help improve and definitely increase the lifestyle that they're in. I think we've got common areas like parks, swimming pools, even some of the roadways are actually shared as well that are actually private. So I would ask that you consider this a friendly amendment, please.
Representative Norris.
Chair Howard, Representative Dotseth, thanks for bringing this amendment forward. I agree. I think it was a good idea to add this language in, and I do accept it as a friendly amendment and recommend a yes vote.
Thank you. And I'll withdraw the roll call vote.
All those in favor of the A3 say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The A3 is adopted. Next, we have the A4. So Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll ask for a roll call because I'm guessing this one's going to go south. But here's the thing. The park owner is going to go through some things that are capital investment that they have to make. And you've heard, and you've apparently mentioned a number of egregious things that you've found. In your bill on line 4.23, you say that the park owner shall not use the cost of capital improvements for justification of increase in rents. Well, please point out to me another business that has capital improvements that are required that doesn't do just that through possibly increasing the price of something. Or if we're talking about a regular apartment and they have to make capital improvements, that they would not then build that into the cost of the rent of that apartment. This is not a difficult concept to understand. What you're effectively saying, Representative, is that improvements will have to get made by the park owner, and they cannot have the residents contribute towards the recoupment of that, but they're just going to have to bear it all on their own. That is really an unconscionable stick in the eye to the park owners. And if you, I think you said you're a homeowner. when you make an improvement, you yourself are bearing that cost, and you're doing so willingly. You're saying, I understand that this is part of the cost of ownership. Cost of ownership for them is born in result of the people who live in those areas. And you've said that folks have reached out and, our amenities are not what we'd like them to be. You need to fix this. Well, that's part of doing business, is recouping your costs. This is very, very heavy-handed. And I'm not sure that you've maybe thought all the way through this. And if I could, Mr. Chair, ask the author, have you worked with MMHA on your bill? Have you gone through these things? Because I'm not sure if you have or you haven't. I'm really curious.
Representative Norris.
Chair Howard, Representative Nash, like I mentioned, I have been meeting with park owners and different groups. We have gone over the language. We continue to go over the language. What you're talking about here, you've actually only read part of the provision. It says a park owner shall not use the cost of capital improvements or rehabilitation work to justify any future rent increase once that cost has been fully recovered by rent increases that were incorporated into a prior rent increase. So what this is trying to avoid is a situation where, I've got a park owner right now in my district who is making some great road upgrades to the park. And that's fantastic that they're investing in the park. What we don't want to see is 20 years from now, after all those capital improvements have been fully recovered and more, them justifying a rent increase by saying, well, 20 years ago, we made all these improvements to the park. And so that's what this provision is getting at. It's not preventing anybody. In fact, there's a separate section in the bill that explicitly allows the park owners to recoup capital improvements to the park.
Representative Nash.
Mr. Chair, we'll disagree on that one, and I'll renew my request for the roll call.
With that, or Representative Johnson, sorry.
Chair Howard, Representative Norris, I'm looking at a handout from All Park Alliance for Change, in Section 4 there. It says one of the reasons that they can raise rent is directly related to operating and maintaining and improving the park. When they do improvements or amenities or capital improvements, there's the initial cost, but then there's ongoing costs. That a lot of, you put in a park or a swimming pool is very expensive to put in. Liability insurance on it is huge. So those are ongoing costs that keep going forever with it, and that it's got to be in the rent. By what your bill has, what you read off, once it's been fully recovered, is that the capital cost to build a swimming pool, or is that the cost to keep maintaining it? The way your bill is written, it's only the original cost to build it. There's no maintenance of that. So I think it needs to be put on to make clarity. So what the group that been working with you, All Park Alliance for Change, that's what they want. That's what they said. They said the capital improvements and stuff like that should be part of it. But your bill does not allow it to continue for the continued upkeep and maintenance of those capital improvements.
Representative Norris.
Chair Howard, Representative Johnson, I direct you to lines 4.5 and 4.6 in the bill, which explicitly allows changes in operating and maintenance expenses to be accounted for when determining reasonable rent. So in a situation where you have a capital improvement, you fully depreciate it, you recoup the cost of that capital improvement. But if there are additional operating expenses or maintenance expenses associated with that, this bill explicitly permits the park owners from incorporating that into a rent increase.
With that, members, the roll call having been requested, I will call for the vote. Call for the roll.
Chair Howard.
Chair votes no.
Chair Howard, nay. Vice Chair Agbaje.
No.
Vice Chair Agbaje, nay. Representative Johnson?
Yes.
Representative Johnson, aye. Representative Cha? Representative Cha, nay. Representative Dotseth?
Aye.
Representative Dotseth, aye. Representative Hassan?
No.
Representative Hassan, nay. Representative Hussein, excused. Representative Kozlowski?
No.
Representative Kozlowski, nay. Representative Myers?
Aye.
Representative Myers, aye. Representative Nash? Aye. Representative Nash, aye. Representative Norris?
No.
Representative Norris, nay. Representative Perez Vega?
No.
Representative Perez Vega, nay. Representative Petersburg?
Aye.
Representative Petersburg, aye. Chair, that concludes roll call with 5 ayes and 7 nays and 1 excused.
With 5 ayes and 7 nays, the amendment is not adopted. We'll now move to the last amendment, the A5 amendment. Is that Representative Johnson? All right, Representative Johnson.
Chair Howard, this amendment appropriates $50 million in fiscal year '24 from the general fund of the Commissioner of Housing and Finance Agency for payments to manufactured home park owners who lost rental income due to the inability to raise rents proportionally to the expenses of maintaining and operating mobile home parks. Unfortunately, we're going to have to do something like this with this bill. I look at one trailer park in my community. The city, because of infrastructure needs, has to raise property taxes roughly somewhere between the 250 and 400% this year. And that's going to have to go on for a number of years to cover the costs of the infrastructure needs they need to do. Hoping to get that fixed in the bonding bill this year, but we don't know if it's going to happen. But with the way this bill is written, going the past 3 years, looking at the CPI, that's not even going to cover the cost of the increase in property taxes that's going to happen, or the rent's not going to, what you can raise the rent's not even going to cover the cost of the property taxes. It's going to go backwards big time. And the kicker on that is when they get their renter's credit for property tax paid, although they didn't pay it, the tenants are going to get the property tax return. But this is going to help those in need where their expenses go up much higher than the rent that they can provide. They'll have to do documentation and show it. But it'll give an opportunity to recoup those costs so they don't have to foreclose or have the mobile home park foreclosed on, possibly shut down, have to sell the land and end the mobile home park, because that is great workforce housing. But with this bill goes forward, we have a number of mobile home managers and parks that are going to need this funding to keep them alive. Because bills like this is actually going to hurt workforce housing and hurt low-income housing. So we need to find a way to keep those facilities open. And I'm hoping you'll take this as a friendly amendment, because I think it's important, because if we don't do something to help these housing providers in the mobile home park world, they're going to be gone. And that'll be the end of some of our vast majority of our affordable housing and our workforce housing.
Representative Norris.
Chair Howard, Representative Johnson, unfortunately, I don't consider this a friendly amendment. We hear a lot in the House about the importance of fiscal responsibility, and I agree with that, placing that importance on fiscal responsibility. Unfortunately, this amendment is not fiscally responsible because it appropriates money for a problem that doesn't exist and won't exist under this bill. The amendment is designed to cover costs due to the inability to raise rents proportionate to the expenses of maintaining and operating their manufactured home parks. As we've previously discussed, the bill explicitly permits the owners to include those costs in a reasonable rent increase. Representative Johnson mentioned property taxes. Line 4.4 specifically says that they can go above CPI if there are costs associated with property taxes or other taxes. So this amendment is a solution in search of a problem.
Representative Johnson.
Chair Howard, Representative Norris, I'm a little disappointed. There was just a press conference today where the Housing Committee is going to be spending over $3 billion with a B dollars. $50 million is peanuts and chump change compared to the close to $3-4 billion that you're planning to spend to keep affordable workforce housing available. I'm disappointed. And with that, I'll request a roll call.
Roll call having been requested. I do appreciate the plug for a press conference today, Representative Johnson. But any other comments to the amendment?
No, Chair Howard.
All right. I'll call for the vote.
Chair Howard.
No.
Chair Howard, nay. Vice Chair Agbaje.
No.
Vice Chair Agbaje, nay. Representative Johnson.
Yes.
Representative Johnson, aye. Representative Shaw.
No.
Representative Shaw, nay. Representative Dotseth.
Aye.
Representative Dotseth, aye. Representative Hassan.
No.
Representative Hassan, nay. Representative Hussein, excused. Representative Kozlowski.
No.
Representative Kozlowski, nay. Representative Myers.
Aye.
Representative Myers, aye. Representative Nash. Aye. Representative Nash, aye. Representative Norris.
No.
Representative Norris, nay. Representative Perez Vega.
No.
Representative Perez Vega, nay. Representative Petersburg.
No, aye, excuse me.
Representative Petersburg, aye. Chair, that concludes roll call with 5 ayes and 7 nays.
With 5 ayes and 7 nays, the amendment is not adopted. That concludes our amendments. It will go to discussion to the bill. We've had a pretty full discussion, but does anybody have any comments on the bill? I'm going to go to Representative Cha, then to Representative Nash.
I just want to make a comment. I'd like to thank Michelle Carlson for coming down and Dave Zeck for testifying. I think that was very helpful. But I do believe, Representative Norris, that you are the right person to be in the space to handle these issues. So I appreciate your leadership and, continue your good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative John.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If the testifier from MMHA could come down, I have one question for them relative to the bill.
Mr. Smith.
Yeah. So as he's coming up,
Wait, Mr. Smith or Mr. Bruner?
Mr. Bruner.
Okay, Mr. Bruner.
Yep.
Got a lot of acronyms that are very similar in this housing space.
MMHA.
Yeah.
So we've heard that we're trying to get rid of a 2-time per year rent increase. Can you tell the committee what was the genesis of the 2-time per year increase for rent as it became statute?
Sure.
Mr. Bruner.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yes, Representative Nash, the genesis, that is, it actually ties into how they pay personal property taxes on a manufactured home. The idea being that, say you're the owner of a community and you're going to do a rent increase this year of $25 a month. You've decided, well, we'll implement half of it at the first of the year. The second half of the rent increase will take effect in June rather than all at once. At the beginning of the year, it would be phased in, which is sort of modeled after how you pay the personal property taxes. The county bills a homeowner twice a year, and they make their payments so they can better afford to pay their taxes. So it's really that simple. Most owners will figure what they're going to increase rents by at the beginning of the year, and they have the option of spreading it out or making it a one-time bigger hit.
Representative Nash.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I'm correct in preparing for the bill, this was actually at the request of people who were renting in the parks?
Yes, that's my recollection, is that it would allow the rent increase to be split up if that was the desire of the owner, instead of doing it all at one time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Norris, any final comments on the bill?
Thank you, Chair Howard. Appreciate the discussion we've had here today. I think you're seeing that, we're open to finding up.
Representative Norris, sorry, you could sort of see us moving over. I think Representative Johnson did have one final comment on the bill, and then we'll renew our motion to send this bill to Commerce. Representative Johnson.
Chair Howard, Representative Norris, I want to thank you for at least taking some of the amendments today. I'm making a bad bill not quite as bad. One thing I've noticed with rent control, it does the exact opposite of what we want it to do. It restricts availability of rental units. And this is going to restrict the availability of manufactured home parks to expand. We already heard from multiple testifiers that if this bill goes through, expansion plans are probably going to be scrapped. We need these facilities. We need workforce housing across this state, and that's going to hurt. A statewide limit on rental and restrictions on rental agreements between property management, housing providers, their tenants or renters in these situations is going to run them out. The word I was looking for at one time, it's almost a socialist idea. It's not a capital idea, it's a socialist idea. We've seen the rent control in the Twin Cities is actually hurt, and now we're pushing it again. It's a bad idea, it should be rejected. And I would think that anybody can see what's happened with the rent control in the metro. The areas that put it in place, the number of units available have dwindled. I'm going to request or ask that my members vote against it, and with that, I would request a roll call.
Roll call requested on the bill. And I do understand there's a member of the public that wanted to share a minute of testimony, and so I want to make time for that too. Welcome to the committee. State your name and share your testimony.
Hi, my name is Erin Lambert. Hello, Chair Howard and Representative Nash. My dad is the owner of Summit Management and Brookside. Not once has he made a rent increase because. He does it because the city raises water or because of the road needs fixing or the potholes. So I could not reach the regional manager today to ask about why we upgraded that or that $40 increase. So I would give you an answer after that. But and we have not heard about water problems or any of these problems that the resident is talking about, so I would love to discuss that further with you afterwards, and I would love to talk with you about your bill. I think it's a great way to increase communication, and I appreciate your bill. So thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Now I'll go to Representative Norris. Final comments, then we'll take a vote.
We're keeping you on your toes today, Chair Howard. Well, thanks again, members, for the discussion. And there's a couple things in close that I want to do to try to correct the record. First, we've heard that there isn't an issue with significantly increased rents, and I will acknowledge that this is not a universal problem, but. We have an article here from the Washington Post. We're all afraid. Massive rent increases hit mobile homes. We have an article from Fox Business. Mobile home rent increases skyrocketing as corporations take ownership. So, right, left, pick your news source. It seems to be fairly universal that there is a problem out there that needs to be addressed. I've even heard it from some of the park owners that I've talked to. They've acknowledged that there's some bad actors out there, and there are parks where we're seeing significant increases in rent. I also want to correct the fact that this is not something where you can't take into account increases in expenses. As we went over, the bill specifically permits increased expenses, whether they be taxes, whether they be operating expenses, whether they be capital expenses, to be taken into account. And so that's why I actually push back on the notion of this being rent control, because what it really is doing is defining a term that has been in our statutes since the 1980s. So if you've got a problem with the reasonableness term, take it up with our predecessors from the 80s. What this bill is trying to do is provide some guidance for park owners and for residents so that they know what is reasonable. We've also heard that this will have a chilling effect on parks and development. And we've seen these same regulations in other states, and they still have parks there. And also, I'm a corporate lawyer by training. And one thing that lawyers don't like and they counsel their clients against is uncertainty. And if I'm looking at a statute that has this vague, reasonable rent definition versus a statute that clearly outlines these are the parameters for how a court would go about determining if there was a challenge to a rent increase, whether this is reasonable or not, I would be much more comfortable with my client proceeding with an investment in a situation where the definition is clearly defined and we know what to expect if a rent increase gets challenged. So I'll renew my commitment to working with all the stakeholders to look if there are ways to improve the bill. I think you saw today my openness and willingness to do that, even on the fly, as we continue to hear different arguments and points of view. And with that, members, I would urge a yes vote for this bill. Thank you.
And I'll call the vote.
Chair Howard.
Aye.
Chair Howard, aye. Vice Chair Agbaje.
So sorry, I'm going to make sure that I'm doing process. I want to make sure that it's clear that this is a vote in renewing my motion to send House File 1976 as amended to the House Commerce, Finance, and Policy Committee. All right, take two.
Chair Howard.
Aye.
Chair Howard, aye. Vice Chair Agbaje.
Aye.
Vice Chair Agbaje, aye. Representative Johnson.
No.
Representative Johnson, nay. Representative Chaw.
Yes.
Representative Chaw, aye. Representative Dotseth.
No.
Representative Dotseth, nay. Representative Hassan.
Yes.
Representative Hassan, aye. Representative Hussain, excused. Representative Kozlowski.
Yes.
Representative Kozlowski, aye. Representative Myers.
Nay.
Representative Myers, nay. Representative Nash.
No.
Representative Nash, nay. Representative Norris.
Yes.
Representative Norris, aye. Representative Perez Vega.
Yes.
Representative Perez Vega, aye. Representative Petersburg.
Nay.
Representative Petersburg, nay. Chair, that concludes roll call with 7 ayes and 5 nays.
With that, the bill is on its way to Commerce. And I'm up next, so I'm going to hand the gavel over to Vice Chair Agbaje.
Hope so.
Chair Howard, as you're getting settled, I will move that House File 1419 be re-referred to the House Taxes Committee. Chair Howard, when you're ready, please present your bill.
Thank you, Chair Agbaje. House File 1419 is a bill that I carried last year that was carried in our House omnibus tax bill that provides a way for us to think outside the box and deliver resources directly to communities all across the state to address the unique housing challenges. This session, we've heard about how all across the state we face housing challenges, whether it's in greater Minnesota with workforce housing, whether it's preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing, or the need to create deeply affordable housing in the metro area. What this bill would do is create an aid, a local housing aid, directly to counties and cities, providing resources directly to entities so that they can address the unique housing challenges in their own community. And partly this bill is born out of the many conversations I've had with community development directors and local elected officials and community members all across the state. And every time I have a conversation with an one of those folks, an economic development director in greater Minnesota or anywhere, I'm always just blown away by the wherewithal, the smarts, the understanding of the local needs. But so often, the piece that's missing is the resource. Communities don't have the resources to help through their local HRAs, et cetera, to help projects move forward when the market simply is not going to do that work. And so what this bill does is provide $300 million in formula-based aid to communities. In the packet, you'll see some runs that address how much resource will go to counties and cities across the state. To address, we have an array of uses, but it's very flexible and designed that way intentionally so that communities can use these resources to address unique local needs. I'll mention that a large chunk goes to counties and to cities, larger cities. We also create a set aside for smaller cities that would be an RFP process. Just want to briefly describe the rationale there. When we were kind of creating the runs, we realized that, for a small city, it might not do much good for that city to have a couple $1,000s to, what are they going to actually do with it? So for those smaller cities, what we thought we'd do is create a set aside. So maybe once every handful of years, a city may want to apply for the resources to complete a project in their community. So being intentional about making these resources accessible for cities, large and small, and counties all across the state. Members, we've talked about this issue, how we have a statewide housing challenge with unique issues, and that's exactly what this bill does. With that, I look forward to testimony and discussion on the bill.
Thank you, Chair Howard. On the list, I've got two testifiers. We'll start with David Dunn. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Dave Dunn. I serve as the housing director for Olmsted County, and I'm here today on behalf of Olmsted County and the Association of Minnesota Counties to enthusiastically voice my support for House File 1419. I wish I had a lot more time to walk through all of the reasons why I think this is a transformational opportunity for those of us who work in housing across the state. But I also understand that you probably don't want to be here at 8 o'clock tonight. So in fairness of time, I'll try to keep my remarks brief. But I think you can tell by my tone, this is something that, from my perspective, working in greater Minnesota, that's very needed and very appreciated, and it's an amazing opportunity. One of the things that we struggle with is funding, and whether it's for housing rehab, rental preservation, kind of you name it, we struggle with that. And then in large part what we struggle with is the flexibility. And so I think what I really think is great about this is a resource for all of Minnesota's 87 counties to look at what are their unique needs, what is needed within our communities, and to create some opportunities to address those. And so looking at that and kind of looking at this opportunity, I see this as a generational opportunity for housing in the state of Minnesota. And really, as I see it, and I'm not going to go into, like I said, I could talk about this for an awful long time because I'm very excited about this. But just a couple of ways I see this helping in our community. And so to oversimplify, one of the things I talk about is the housing continuum really touches on four pieces. It's for the people who are experiencing homelessness or really suffering from housing insecurity. It's creating affordable rental opportunities. It's providing a pathway to home ownership. It's providing senior housing options for our aging populations, and it's doing all of those through an equity lens. As we really try to oversimplify kind of what we're trying to do in the housing world, I see it that way, and I see opportunities in all of those areas for this bill to provide that assistance to us locally. Just to give you a couple of examples, just yesterday I met with a local mental health provider who would really like to provide housing support, provide the housing support program locally, but is struggling to find units. And so they met with us to request some financing or to request a loan or a grant. This bill would allow that. And when we're talking about, a small multifamily property, it's really not feasible to go through the state programs for a $300,000 or $400,000 loan. But this program, this opportunity, this flexibility offers that for us. It also allows us to do small rental projects. It allows us to look at home ownership. I think one of the things that we're seeing in Olmsted County, which is no different than anywhere else in Minnesota, is just the huge need for starter, modest home ownership opportunities. And I think for me, really being able to be innovative, creative, work with the private market, leverage those opportunities is what I think this is a great bill. And so I just, on behalf of Association of Minnesota Counties, on behalf of Olmsted County, want to thank you for allowing me to testify in support of this today, and look forward to being able to take this opportunity and being able to report back to you on how it's impacting people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next testifier on the list is Daniel Lightfoot. Please state your name and proceed with your testimony.
Well, thank you, Chair Agbaje, members of the committee. My name is Daniel Lightfoot with the League of Minnesota Cities. I want to just take a little bit of time to thank Chair Howard for carrying this bill and proposing another important flexible resource for cities across the state that are trying to address locally identified housing needs. The bill as drafted, as you see here, is the language is a product of multiple conversations with the bill author, as well as city and county stakeholders, and reflects changes to ensure that cities, regardless of size, could be eligible for resources under this program. Cities across the state are focused on innovating at the local level and utilizing their limited resources to address our locally identified housing needs. Cities have helped develop successful local efforts to address housing needs across the housing spectrum, as have been discussed in committee, from locally funded down payment assistance programs, direct developer assistance by way of tax abatement and tax increment financing, low-cost city-owned land, and city directives to prepare lots for development with infrastructure, and many more. All importantly, ensure that public resources provided for a project results in a public benefit, which is also most often affordability. While cities do continue to pull every lever they can to help assist with the construction, acquisition, and preservation of a diverse array of housing stock, cost burden continues to be pervasive for residents across the state, and the demand for more affordable housing options continues to outpace local efforts. It is critical, if we are to continue addressing our local and regional housing needs, we need a stronger state-local partnership that supports innovation at the local level. And House File 1419 is a perfect example of a flexible state resource that empowers cities to use state resources to bolster their efforts in addressing their unique housing needs, which, as have been mentioned in this committee, looks vastly different from region to region and city to city. And while many cities have been able to access resources through the various Minnesota housing programs that have been discussed in this committee, there is an immense need for flexible resources that can be tailored to individual city needs. Smaller communities especially have some challenges, as was discussed by Mr. Dunn, in accessing some existing programs due to some complexities and scalability. And the provision in this bill would allow for more scalability for smaller communities and the ability to be tailored to a unique community identified housing need. The $60 million in flexible local affordable housing aid distributed via cost burden formula for cities above 10,000 in population, as well as the additional aid via a grant program for smaller cities, as called for in the bill, is an important step in expanding the state-local partnership to address housing, and is consistent with the League's priorities to support housing efforts across the spectrum, encourage local innovation through additional state resources, and allow state funding to be tailored to community-specific needs. Establishing this program will mean that cities across the state can do more to attract new development, address rehabilitation needs of existing properties, assist residents with down payment assistance, and importantly, help our developer community bend the cost curve to make new and existing affordable housing options available to our residents.
Mr. Lightfoot, if you could wrap up.
Yep.
Okay, good.
That's it. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I will open to testimony from any members of the public. Not seeing any, we'll go to member discussion. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and if Mr. Lightfoot would come back down. I know, I'm sorry. Madam Chair, and to the testifier, Mr. Lightfoot from the League of Minnesota Cities. So if this were to happen, is there also a discussion where we can potentially look at some ordinance changes in local municipalities to piggyback on the back of this that cities are going to be getting to make it easier to actually build homes in cities?
Mr. Lightfoot.
Madam Chair, Representative Nash, thank you for the question. Certainly, we are open to conversations around any efforts at the state level that seeks to incentivize changes that result in the ability for a local unit of government to make those changes at the local level that makes sense for their individual community and uniquely identified housing needs. So I'm certainly happy to have that conversation, as you know, and we've had many conversations about this topic. And I'm venturing to guess we'll be having some of these conversations in the coming days, but certainly open to conversations about ways the state can partner with local units of government to ensure that those changes come from the local level, from the bottom-up approach, rather than a one-size-fits-all top-down approach.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just comment that it seems that the League is quite excited about receiving money through statute, but also doesn't want to or would oppose any change to housing issues as a result of statute. And I find that to be a little bit of a juxtaposition. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Any comments, Representative Howard, or? Nope. Okay.
I'll just say, I will make a comment that, I think we can have a fuller conversation about the local zoning, state's role, et cetera, and I think we will. But I'm convinced that the biggest challenge facing us, especially to build deeply affordable or to build housing in greater Minnesota where the market isn't building it, we need public investment. That is the key ingredient that's missing. So if you're weighting sort of levels of importance, public funding is the key ingredient from my perspective. And that's what this bill does and focuses on.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for looking at this and working on this. I have some concerns in the way it is kind of structured, or at least I have questions about it. It appears that this is really directed towards low-income housing, and the communities out in greater Minnesota and where I'm coming from also need workforce housing as well, because in order for a community as a whole to grow and maintain its viability, it needs jobs. In order to have jobs with the low unemployment rate that we have right now, we need to draw people in for getting those jobs and maintaining them so that people that are in the low-income housing or affordable housing be able to move forward into other larger homes, et cetera. And so I'm wondering, is there a way for this program to be able to also help in the affordable housing for workforce development?
Representative Howard.
Chair Agbaje, Representative Petersburg, great question. We had many conversations and still ongoing with greater Minnesota communities to make sure that this is a program that can work and be accessible. In terms of qualifying projects, I want to just highlight for home ownership, we're talking about qualifying projects being at 115% of greater or area median income, and for rental, we're talking about 80% of area median income. And so, when I think of, deeply affordable, sometimes we refer to, that 30% or very low income. This, I think, would be able to build housing where there are needs in greater Minnesota at that 80%, at that 115%. But I am open to a continued discussion if those levels, we should be tweaking them or looking at for greater Minnesota, because I absolutely view this as a critical tool to address local needs and want to make sure that it's accessible for greater Minnesota.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you. And upon your consideration, I would just reference you to the 10,000 people and less, and maybe I misunderstand it, but in greater Minnesota, that eliminates most of the cities out there. And so maybe I misinterpreted what it meant, because I live in a town that only has 8,500 people, and this seems like it would disqualify that unless it means something else in a different section. So,
Chair Howard.
Chair Agbaje, another good question. So the reason we structured it this way is counties and cities that are larger, and, you know, maybe 10,000 isn't the perfect cutoff, but when you get to the way the aid is distributed, if a city has a population of 2,000, 1,000, 5,000, the aid dollars that we would give just frankly wouldn't be enough to be an impact on their own. If you're giving a small city an aid that's a couple $1,000s, can they really use that to help finance a project in their community? Is that, or is it just sort of not enough? And so what we did to structure, we did want to make it accessible to smaller cities at 10,000 or below. And so what we did is we create an RFP sort of pot of money that would be accessible for those small communities. Maybe your community once every 2 or 3 years has a project and you go through an RFP process and can access quite a bit more than you would if it had been just sort of a pittance of a small amount. I will say the other thing we are looking at doing in taxes is upping the threshold for our smaller counties in terms of where the level sort of kicks in. It's again, you know, anytime you're talking about a formula, you're trying to move pieces and try to figure out what equity looks like, but that's sort of the thinking about where the bill stands and how we're trying to make sure that it's accessible for all communities.
Final comments, Representative Petersburg?
Yeah, just thank you for that, because I think that's important that we understand that smaller communities have a harder time creating the need. The need is still there, but creating the funding source for it. And so how do we actually get that across? And I know that you're working on it, and I would just ask you to continue. Thank you.
Representative Johnson.
Chair Agbaje, Chair Howard, I appreciate what you're trying to do here. And I get the explanation now with cities under 10,000 not getting a dime unless they try to get a grant, which is peanuts compared to what everybody else is getting. I look at Hennepin County, over $55 million. Almost what the small cities in the state of Minnesota are going to get combined. And then you throw the city of Minneapolis on top of that. And I think, where was the city of Minneapolis? City of Minneapolis, another 10. So the city of Minneapolis and Hennepin County get more than most of the counties across the state. We have a workforce problem issue for housing, and Representative Peterson brought that up. In greater Minnesota, we have tons of jobs available. We have many that have been available for years. They find somebody to fill the position, but there's no place for them to live. They want to buy a house, but that can take up to 6 months. There's no place to rent. There's no workforce housing. Very difficult, especially if they have families. I don't know if this is going to help the problem or not, but there's a lot of things that need to be worked on this project. This does nothing to bring the cost of rent or housing, the cost of building a house or building rentals down. It just shifts the cost. But the city, some of these cities that would qualify, would get funding, the cost to build a house in that city, the money would sit there and go back because they couldn't use it because of the cost of building a house in their jurisdictions because of some of the things they require. I wish this committee would start looking at how to reduce the cost of housing, how to build a house, reduce the cost to get rental units, reduce the burdens on housing providers. This bill doesn't do that. This just shifts the cost. to the taxpayers who were overpaid their taxes to the sum in the last couple of years of almost $19 billion. We need to get the money back to the people who paid it. And not just shift the costs for other things. You know, I'm not sure how I feel about this bill. I just was texting one of my county commissioners. They don't even have a program to deal with it. One of my cities does, but they don't qualify. Another city needs it really bad, but they're too little to get they'd have to fight for a grant. With probably 90% of the cities in the state because they're under 10,000. But the city of Minneapolis and Hennepin County gets more than them combined. Need to work on the formula, get that fixed. Get more parameters in there so we can actually, in greater Minnesota, use it for what we need it for, workforce housing. But then, again, I understand the intentions, but I think it might be a little bit of misplaced priorities because it's, in the state of Minnesota, it's a huge state. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And you get outside of this inner core and the exurbs, it's a whole different world, and it's God's country.
Chair Howard.
Thank you, Chair Agbaje. Just a few comments. To the last comment, we want to give resources out to God's country to address their needs, and that's what this dollars would do, is be flexible so communities could address those needs that are specific to their communities. And I've had many conversations with Greater Minnesota community development directors, elected officials to inform this, and they think these resources will help build the housing that's vastly needed in Greater Minnesota. I'm happy to continue to work and see if there are other ways to make it even stronger on that front. And to just the question about how do we make homes more affordable for people, it feels sometimes we have a little bit of a kind of myopic discussion of that. One of the pieces that the reason houses are more are not affordable for folks is our massive supply-demand mismatch all across our state. A bill like this would help us build more homes all across the state, which in turn will make homes more affordable for everyone. And it is important to me that this is statewide, and so I would commit to folks to continue to work on that if there are ways to make it work even better. But it is, the formula is based on the percentage of Minnesotans who are paying more than 30% of their income in housing. And more people do live in Hennepin County and Minneapolis. But what this bill does is create a path for funds to be accessible and used all across the state, which is why it has statewide support. With that, I would encourage
one
members
more
to support the
comment
bill.
first. Representative Nash,
Oh, sure,
before
Representative
we
Nash.
wrap up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be brief. Chair Howard, you just said that we're trying to take care of God's country as well, and I would remind you that God does live in cities under 10,000 population, so let's remember that.
Thank you, Representative Nash. Any final comments, Chair Howard?
I grew up in one of those cities, Representative Nash, and they can use this bill. But I would encourage you, I would encourage your support.
With that, I renew my motion that House File 1419 be re-referred to the House Taxes Committee. So we will be calling, all those in favor? Please say aye. Aye. It's 5 o'clock. I'm sorry. All those opposed, please say no.
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 Thank you. The ayes carry the motion, and the bill is on its way to the House Taxes Committee.
Thank you. All right, members, we get to close the hearing with, okay, we're doing House File 2279 next. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Howard and members of the committee. And speaking of God's country, the guest also lives in college student housing. But today I am bringing forward and proud to bring forward House File 2279. This is a bill that I've been working with our college student leaders and would also place restrictions on early renewal practices that are occurring, ensure tenants have the right to request a fair inspection of their unit at the start and end of their lease, as well as protect renters from unfair or unfair damage charges from their landlords. So this bill is really the result of some really phenomenal student advocacy that seeks to crack down on some predatory practices that are occurring, especially near college campuses all across the state. So as I've been meeting with our student leaders about this issue, who have actually brought this problem to me, to my office, they're telling me that we have to do something. It's happening in far too many communities and is really impacting negatively our young Minnesotans and students, but also ultimately our communities where we want them to thrive and we want them to come and learn and we want them to stay and work and live and play. And so today we'll be hearing from some of those leaders just in a few minutes. And they're going to tell you about the immense pressure that they're under and the pressure to renew these leases as quickly as they sign them. In fact, the University of Minnesota's Student Legal Services team reviewed about 200 leases that were signed by over 700 students this last year. And in that review, many of these leases found containing provisions that actually required tenants to make a decision on whether they wanted to renew their lease within 15 days of moving into their new home. That is 15 days after they just moved in. So this bill would seek to prevent predatory renewal practices by mandating that landlords, all we're saying is that they just cannot require their tenants to renew their lease until that tenant has occupied the unit for at least 4 months. We are continuing to work with the student leaders as well as with the groups that we've been having conversation. Is right now the legislation the before you says 10 months. We're looking at aligning that to 9 months, which would bring it in line with the academic school year. But we do need to finesse that exact date. And then the second major provision in this bill is also a requirement that landlords provide all tenants with the option to request an inspection of their unit soon after they move in, as well as in the final days before they move out. So this specific bill language will really help ensure that tenants are present at each inspection and are able to discuss or address potential damages and deficiencies. As you know, these kind of inspections, especially mutual inspections, where a tenant and a landlord walk through these units together are, we've found, incredibly rare in neighborhoods with dense student populations. And oftentimes, students are prevented from inspecting their unit before moving in and are burdened with egregious damage fees for standard wear and tear deficiencies in the unit. And then finally, the third provision of this bill would simply ensure that efforts by both the tenant and landlord to find a subletter or to relet the unit that the tenant is leaving would be considered when awarding damages. So this is really important for student tenants who may drop out of college or, life happens, experience financial hardship or have family crisis, and as well as for those students really who have been negatively impacted and under pressure to sign that early renewal lease, who are then seeking to get out of that current lease. So right now I'm going to turn it over to some of our amazing student advocates who are really leading and going to talk to you about what would this bill do to make a really positive impact on their lives and our communities. So I'll invite my first testifier up.
Thank you. Up first, we have Sia Sakuranda, an undergraduate student government with the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair Howard and members of the committee. My name is Sia Sakurnande. I use pronouns like she, her, and hers, and I'm the state coordinator for the undergraduate student government at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. We serve over 30,000 undergraduates who make up our student body. I'm here today to speak in support of House File 2279 because of how this would support tenants, specifically student tenants, across the state. I would like to thank Representative Kozlowski for carrying House File 2279 for listening to student voices and working to support them. I'd also like to thank Chair Howard for his support of our efforts. A common experience for students at the U with their landlords is extreme pressure to renew their leases as early as 15 days after their move-in date. Otherwise, they are at risk for losing their units. For first-time tenants who don't know if they want to continue living with these roommates or whether they like the unit and their landlord, being pressured to secure housing early becomes stressful. This pressure transfers on to first-year students as well because housing options for the next year become so limited during their first months on campus, so they get stuck in a similar cycle. The creation of a secure period of housing where a tenant can gauge all aspects of their living situation supports students to fairly obtain housing without external pressures. Another aspect of this bill that would be super beneficial to tenants would be conducting walkthroughs at the start and end of the lease. One of our USG senators, Michael Malika, shared a story with me about moving into an unsanitary unit at the start of last semester. Michael was moving into his new apartment off campus after the summer, and the first thing he noticed when he walked into the kitchen was mold on the countertops. Upon further inspection, Michael observed mold in all areas of his kitchen: sink, cabinet, fridges, etc. He made several requests for cleaning and assistance from his landlords to remedy this situation, but it wasn't until someone from his landlord's office visited the unit to drop off a set of spare keys that this was taken seriously. Had a walkthrough occurred when Michael was moving in, then this would have been remedied much quicker. Conducting a similar walkthrough at the end of the lease would help landlords and tenants discuss and take actions over the condition of the unit and damages caused by tenants. The last part of the bill addresses the stress that student tenants feel when they are unable to find subletters for their unit, that they may have to leave because of emergency situations like leaving the U for the summer or for financial reasons. Having support from the landlord in the search would mean that the student is not being punished for an emergency happening that they have no control over. By strengthening our current legislation regarding these issues, your committee would be providing more support to student tenants not only on our campus, but throughout the whole state, which is why we're in support of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Shauna Tumenis with Student Legal Services. Welcome to the committee.
Hello, thank you, Chair Howard, and thank you, Representative Kozlowski. My name is Shana Temenis. I am a staff attorney at Student Legal Service. I represent students specifically at the University of Minnesota related to housing and consumer law issues. I'm also here to answer any technical questions you have about the bill, so that way I can, provide any answers or any questions. As far as for the three measures, I wanted to speak first to the early renewal provision. Now, this provision, as it was discussed first by Sia, really would curtail what I see as a disturbing trend by out-of-state landlords to really pressure students, often first-time renters, into staying into a unit for up to 2 years after only knowing them for 15 days. The most common thing I hear in the over 130 cases that I represented with students on habitability issues is, I got into this unit, it was great, I had my first problem 30 days in, and all of a sudden I can't get a hold of my landlord. These are the sort of situations where we want to build trust between renters and landlords, and it seems to be a problem that is growing. What I always say is what you see in university housing, whether that's in Mankato, whether that's at the Twin Cities, is often adopted by other landlords who use the same practices and share the same leases. This is a problem that can be easily addressed, isn't being used by mom and pop shops, and wouldn't affect them. I also want to talk a little bit about the issues related to the mitigation of damages. Now, a 1954 Minnesota Supreme Court case, and then further clarified in a 1978 Minnesota Supreme Court case, stated that landlords have no duty to mitigate damages in residential cases. What that means for students is when they move out of their house in November because they were unable to, due to financial reasons, due to scholastic reasons, stay in their housing, the landlord has no duty to post that on the internet and say, hey, there's an empty unit here. They have no duty to try to get someone else into this unit during that period. And instead, someone who's 19, 18 years old is being, brought to a conciliation court or being put on their credit for years at a time for what it could have been a unit in the market that was picked up. We know we have a tight market and we know there's a good place for that to be done. It doesn't require anything other than an effort by both parties. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Katie Smithberg. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair Howard and members of the committee. My name is Katie Smithberg. I use pronouns like she, her, and hers, and I am a sophomore at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share the systemic problems I've encountered in living in off-campus housing. I'm here today in support of House File 2279 because it would provide the necessary protections for student renters. First, I want to address the impact of exploitive rental renewal practices. As a first-year student, I moved into my apartment in September, yet in order to secure my unit for the following year, I was obligated to re-sign my lease the next month. I really liked my apartment, but I didn't know enough about the management quality or my roommates to commit to living there another year. I was still adjusting to college life, and the constant emails pushing me to either renew my lease or lose my unit created unnecessary stress. Other students have also shared similar feelings of stress resulting from landlords pushing for lease renewals. I ended up not renewing my lease last year, but if I had more time to consider my options, I would have been more likely to re-sign without feeling obligated to from my landlord's insistence. Another concern among students is the security deposit within the lease. A requirement for a mutual walkthrough at the beginning and end of lease would prevent miscommunication between landlords and tenants. This has significant financial implications for students. Not only have I heard stories of people moving into poorly kept units, but I have experienced this as well. This year, our unit was dirty and had many initial flaws on the walls, furniture, and more. I would have felt much more comfortable moving in if the landlord would have discussed these issues with us before our first payment. Additionally, the end of lease walkthrough is just as important for renters, and I have experienced the consequences. Last year, my unit was fined over $700 for a broken shelf that we had submitted a work order for. Despite being told that it would be fixed while we were still living there, the fine was issued weeks after we moved out, and therefore we had no choice but to pay it. If the landlord would have walked through our apartment, we could have discussed this matter and potentially fixed the shelf without paying an unreasonable amount of money. Students should not be held responsible for landlord miscommunication or the faults from previous renters. Through talking to my peers, I have heard so many stories just like mine regarding the issues students face when renting around campus. By supporting this legislation, your committee would be providing more support to tenants not only on our campus, but throughout the whole state. House File 2279 would ensure that vulnerable students are being protected. From my research, the students at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities are in support of this bill, and we are seeking your help. Thank you.
Thank you. Last, we have Cecil Smith. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm sorry you have to hear from me twice today, but if you note the calendar, it is the first of the month, and all my members are very busy with their customers today. Mr. Chair, again, I'm Cecil Smith from the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify on House File 2279. Section 1 provides that housing providers cannot ask for a renewal until at least 4 months have passed on a lease or of more than 10 months. This is certainly a student housing focused issue, as it's not something that is commonplace in the general market that we're aware of. As a suggestion, we would recommend to the legislature that potentially these types of proposals would be best hosted in a separate and specific student housing landlord-tenant law bill. These general rules apply to the whole market, whereas this appears to be an unnecessary proposal and student-specific. Section 2 and 3 require inspections. Property management is already stretched with serious labor shortages in a post-pandemic environment. And many housing providers have changed their business practices since the pandemic to have no-contact move-in, move-out, and walkthroughs. We use technology to make that happen. These provisions in the bill are time-consuming and could be challenging to accommodate with these new business processes and employee virtual work. Rather than this, we would recommend to those moving into the apartment that they should record and take pictures of the unit when moving in to document the circumstances and to ensure their protection. Lastly, Section 4 on the mitigation of damages. This is a broad definition and does not clearly outline what is considered a mitigation attempt, whether or not the mitigation was effective, whether the mitigation effort would be even permitted, such as subleasing, and in the case of the housing provider, if this section would require re-renting and prioritization of that unit prior to renting another vacant unit at the property. In most circumstances, these mitigation efforts are already happening. A housing provider knows that when a tenant moves out, they're generally not going to continue paying rent, and re-renting the unit is in their best interests, and in Minnesota, we're not allowed to collect double rent. Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to provide our thoughts and concerns today.
Thank you. We'll move to member discussion. Representative Myers.
Thank you, Chair Nelson. Thank you, Representative Kozlowski, for bringing this. I'm trying to think back on my experience, and this will be the second day we bring up Illinois, but that's where I went to college, so don't hold it against me. It's actually where I grew up. So, you know, some of the place that we rented, it was, you know, me and 4 other people, and, you know, I can think back of being, you know, a little intimidated when entering into a lease, and we all had to, you know, put our names on there and talk to our folks about it. One thing I did like in that is, you know, the mitigation piece. But as the testifier said, I'm hoping we can try to maybe define that a little bit, because I think there is opportunities of doing something as a landlord that you can, you know, say now we have something available for 3 months, 6 months, whatever that is, to help mitigate that. But what I would say is, and he kind of took my question, was this seems very specific to students. You talked a lot about it. The other testifiers talked about it. Hoping maybe after this you'd be willing to maybe talk to define it to students versus the market as a whole. So I'd love to talk more about it if you're open to that.
Representative Kozlowski.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and Representative Myers. Really great points, and I appreciate the testimony. I think this bill is being laid over for inclusion, and as I said, there's some different tweaks that we're looking to make. We're open to definitely having conversations, and also invite back up our student leader who helped craft this bill and has been on the front lines of it. You know, I think to the point of what our testifier said is we're really trying to get at landlords who are more utilizing these predatory practices, and to your point of mitigating that pressure on the early releases. And also, you know, I just signed a lease as a new representative. I've been there as a college student where we walked through our unit together, and sure seems like much better process for both the landlord but also for the tenant to be able to, from the front end, walk through step by step. You know, you're going through your refrigerator, you're walking through scratches on the door, you're looking at the appliances and whatnot in that space. And to have that clarity on the front end, though, might take a little more time and human capacity. But seems like that's going to be a much better scenario for both the renter and the tenant. But I'd ask my testifiers here to chime in, but my sense is that we are definitely willing to work with folks as long as we can ultimately meet the goals of what it is that we want students to not feel pressured, and we want to make sure that they're better informed and not taken advantage of, and getting back security deposits as well.
Representative Myers.
Yeah, I thank you for that. I look forward to working together on that.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm just looking for some clarification, because I believe this is dealing with contracts between 2 individuals that I'm assuming have legal status and capacity in order to enter into those contracted agreements. And my question revolves around page 3 underneath the waiver of any provision, whether oral or written, of any lease or agreement whereby a provision of this section is waived by a tenant is contrary to public policy and void. A couple of things that I have a problem with in regards to that is it's only if that is waived by the tenant. So apparently if it's waived by the unit provider, then it's okay. So, because it's not specific about that. But my question, even beyond that, is if it's in the best interest, if the tenant has made the determination and they have legal standing for that contract, and they waive that particular situation, whatever it might be, why would that be in the contrary of public policy?
I'll go to Ms. Jimenez.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. So to go to the broad piece about, we're both adults here, we're both signing a lease. I would say that, it's never an equal rule. It's when I signed my first lease, I sure didn't come up with that document, and they really didn't like it, and I tried to cross out pieces and thought I was very smart in college. So by the owner of the piece trying to, gets to choose the provisions, and then the renter gets to decide whether or not they sign that. So while this waiver provision, I believe there's ways to write a waiver provision that would make sense and be applicable to both sides. But as a practical matter, the leases aren't created by renters and tenants, they're created by landlords as the property owners. So we have to have a waiver provision in housing cases, because in my experience, if there's not a waiver provision in any legislation, it's immediately, they got smart lawyers too, we all do, they just write a provision in there saying, this provision notwithstanding, and then they insert the law. And so they just find an end run around to circumvent the law. So we, in housing provisions, need to have a waiver saying, if you're trying to get around it and say you agree otherwise, that is void and for public policy reasons. I'm not sure if I answered all of your question. I apologize.
So Representative Petersburg.
Thank you. Again, it goes back to the question of if the tenant thinks the waiver is a good possibility or is something that's good for them, why can't they agree to it? I don't know.
Is that a question?
It's a question. I mean, if a tenant believes that it is in their best interest and they want to waive that particular provision because maybe they've gotten something else in return, that's what contracts are all about, then why isn't that to be allowed? Because in this particular language, it says it's not allowed.
Representative Kozlowski or Ms. Jimenez?
Representative Petersburg, so this is a tenant-initiated provision for 504B 182, so it only occurs when requested by a tenant. So they would have to request a move-in inspection or request a move-out inspection, and then it's determined on a mutually acceptable time. So there would never be a situation where a tenant would not invoke this provision if it wasn't beneficial to them.
Representative Petersburg?
I guess now I'm even more confused, because this says, any provision of this section is waived by the tenant. So in other words, the tenant would initiate the waiving of the provision would be contrary to public policy, which it seems to me is reverse of what you indicated there. Or am I just not getting it?
We'll go to Representative Kozlowski or Ms. Jimenez.
I apologize. So in the practical world, what would happen is me as a tenant, I would come in and say, I want a move-in inspection. And that would be allowed under this subdivision 1. If the lease instead, but that I signed before I moved in, said I'm not allowed to do so, that would be void for public policy. So I think that that's the interaction between the two things. So it says you can't have a lease provision that requires you to waive your right to move in or move out inspection. That's void for public policy. Whether or not a tenant chooses to, invoke that right becomes their choice. They just can't be barred from doing so as part of a lease that everyone signs.
Representative Petersburg.
I think we're just confusing, because I think if I was a tenant and I came to my landlord and says, I'd like to waive this, and he says, great, and he says, I'll give you a little bit off in order for to do it, I would think that that should be allowed. And I think this language says, no, it's not. So I'm not going to belabor it anymore. I'm just confused. So thank you.
Representative Dotseth.
Thank you, Chair Howard. Representative Kozlowski, I appreciate you bringing this to the table. Question I have, I'm understanding this correctly, the intent of this is more towards student housing, correct?
Representative Kozlowski.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Question I have is, with the student housing, do some of these leases have provisions in there where they actually allow subleases? For example, when you leased and you say if you choose to vacate and you've got a qualified friend that wants to take over your position, they could actually then take over your lease. Is that correct?
Representative Kozlowski or Ms. Jimenez.
It's been a while since I've been in student housing, so
Sure. So when we say student housing, I just want to clarify. So there's different rules for if you live in, the University of Minnesota housing. Student housing is privately owned. That's actually, there's rules that are, you can't clarify only students can live here. That's illegal. So when we say student housing, we're saying this 900 unit place is primarily, college age students live here, but anyone off the street could also live there. So that student housing, yes, a lot of them have provisions in there about subleasing. It's usually one paragraph on a 26-page lease, and most landlords actually have a separate sublease policy. Usually there's a subletting fee. Usually there's some sort of provision maybe related to credit or having a guarantor. But a lot of landlords do provide for a subletting option because it's beneficial to both parties.
So for clarification, that would probably apply for these situations as well. Whether this is student housing or whatever this application would be, this would still allow, not the way it's written now, current leases right now would still allow that opportunity for someone to take over that lease. Would that be correct? I'm just.
Ms. Dominguez.
Yeah.
Are you talking about like the move in, move out? I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. Oh, okay, got it. So that's a good question. I'm going to be honest. The words are commencement of a residential lease, and subleasing generally isn't considered a commencement. It's taking over a legal obligation. Often the original tenant is still on the hook for that. Often if there's any sort of security deposit that's being paid, it's not the subtenant security deposit, it's the original renter's security deposit. So there ends up being kind of a relationship in most of those subtenant agreements that leave the original renter on the hook.
Representative Dotsworth.
Thank you for the clarification. Yep.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative, I think there's some really good stuff here. As my kids are renting, they bring me, and I get to be the bad guy. And like when I rent a rental.
No.
I know. Everybody's shocked. But like when I rent a rental car, I walk around the car with people and say, well, this ding is here, and I didn't obviously make this giant scratch, and we get to hold them accountable. And I think that there's a lot that I can support here, but I would hope that, as Mr. Smith said, that we could maybe narrow this to some of his concerns as well, because I do think that there's some stuff that we might want to try to tighten up to write a really good piece of legislation that if this came to the floor on its own with some changes that we've articulated, I'd be happy to vote for it. So, and I see Representative Perez Vega over there still laughing at me actually, being a bad guy. No.
Save your pants.
Yeah. But I do want to work as the legislature to make this happen, because my kids are, I've got several in that age where, to be really honest, they've never negotiated a contract before in their life. And that's why they bring in dad to be the bad guy. But maybe not all of them have that person that can be there for them. And that's why we have statute. So if we can maybe tighten this up so that people who have concerns have them lessened, I think it would be a really good step forward. Thank you.
Representative Johnson.
Chair Howard, I'll just be brief. It seems like every single year we have the university coming here with, whether it's in this committee or judiciary, with rental issues. I think it's time we start looking at having its own chapter, dealing with student rent. And I think we need to start really digging in what's going on with the rental issues around the University of Minnesota, because it's every year we're dealing with it.
Representative Kozlowski, final comments on the bill?
Sure, and I just have to say thank you, and we'll definitely be following up to have these conversations. As I've spoken in here, I am one of those folks who didn't have somebody to go, and I think having a bill like this sure as heck would have helped me and a lot of other peers. And there's certainly work that we can do to make sure that it's as strong as possible and works for everybody. So just want to say thank you. I mean, in the context of our broader housing crisis that we have, this is definitely part of it, and how we are going to support folks in going to seek their educational and career potentials is a really good start with this bill. So ask for your support and thank you for your consideration.
With that, I will make the motion that House File 2279 be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill. And with that, the bill is laid over. Members, we did have one bill left, but we'll get to it another time. And thank everybody for all the quality time with the extra hour. And with that, we're adjourned.